Howdy, howdy, you delicious people. I'm here to review Blind Fury. In all honesty, I'd wanted to go on and check out just kind of movies that deal with the blind because I wanted to just kind of have some more variety on the channel, in my opinion. Like, I was looking into a movie called Tethered or Tether that kind of had a blind character in it that is to tie himself to his home and kind of go on these ventures and so on and so forth. And I also had gone on to see like the Jessica Alba movie, The Eye, or I'd seen this other movie called Blindness. That both those movies kind of came out in 2008. Bizarrely, I don't know why. I was to go on and also, when going through all those, find this film, and it had much more of like an action kind of theme to it. So I was like, all right, like let's see what this is about. And to me, it very much looked like those good old like Jean-Claude movies where we have a drifter coming into town and finding out that there's a family in trouble. So he goes on and helps them out and reunites them together by the end of the film. And then once he goes on and accomplishes that task, he drifts off into the sunset to never be seen again. And like those are the films that I honestly just kind of enjoyed and liked, and this just kind of reminded me of that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to enjoy this kind of film. So we have Nick here. Nick is to have fought in the Vietnam War. Nick then goes on within the Vietnam War to become blind by some explosives that get near his face or his body or his self. So Nick becomes blind and then goes on to end up with Vietnamese people that try to take care of him and then go on to try and teach him swordplay. So Nick goes on to be able to learn some swordplay combative tactics, as well as also him to have been in the military. So Nick then goes on and have some time passing where he makes his way back to the United States, where he makes his way back to the States. And he wants to reunite with Frank, but comes to find out when he goes on and does so, he makes his way back to this home. Frank's not there. Frank doesn't live there anymore. He lives over within Reno. And Frank is to go on and be in hot water because he is to need to be forced to make this drug for a man named McCready. Frank goes on to in the military to have been an explosives expert, and then now he's to be able to make drugs. Not quite sure how exactly that makes sense, but they write him off as some chemist, so I guess explosives and drugs, same thing, right? Same exact thing. But so we have Frank, who McCready feels isn't going to get to the finish line of making these drugs so McCready could sell them. So McCready decides that he's going to use Frank's family against him in a way of keeping this family hostage so he can force Frank to do what McCready needs and then kind of do away with him. Because I guess they bizarrely only wanted to have one drug deal and that's it. I'm sorry, if you have a good thing going here with a guy who can make some drugs, why would you why would you mess that up? But whatever, I guess. Anyways, when Nick makes his way to the Devereaux family, quickly we find out that McCready is to send men, one guy named Slag and two corrupt cops, to try and and tear this family apart. And Nick goes on to then, with family that is to be left, to road trip his way to make his reunion with Frank possible, and then try to rescue Frank from danger. And then by the end of this, like, we keep having kind of these hostage like situations that forces Nick into confronting MacReady by the end of this, to then go on and need him to face off against this assassin, this swordsman that MacReady is to want to go on and pay top dollar for. So this movie to me was just like very much like any other just kind of action movie, but I just enjoyed the way it played out, the whole drifter idea. And I am to go on and say that this movie is to be, at the end of the day, like a solid, okay film. Like, because a lot of people would find this movie very unbelievable. But I just liked how it was playing out. Like, this guy was to, yeah, have a disadvantage, but he would go on and outsmart people. That's why I was go on and just enjoy this film. Um, and so yeah, so this movie is currently available on Tubi right now, TUBI. If for whatever reason that you decide to not want to have a Tubi account, for whatever reason that can go on and be, or maybe you want to have an app of a lot more variety, then just say Tubi. I would recommend an app called Zelivonic, Zelivonic, through a mobile app. If you have a Google Play Store, you should be able to hopefully be able to find this app, or an app called Moopzzi, Moopzzi. Both of these apps, you can pretty much see whatever the F you want to, with the exclusion of some very rare movies and shows that I had a hard time to find, but I wanted to watch them regardless, and coincidentally, I was able to find a way to do so. So, I am to say I would recommend this film for those of you that just want to see something different in your life. And if you are to go on and to have already seen this movie and enjoyed it, just want to hear my words of me uh, re-describing this film to you, which you've already seen, then that's fine too. Or if you were to just be curious as someone else is to enjoy this film, because I did. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just thrust in the way of just breaking this movie down. Because yeah, like I would go on and say, it's like a simple like Daredevil with a sword movie, or it's to be like Samurai Cop, or it's to be any number of these just kind of action films that are to all just kind of seem very familiar at a certain point in time for those of you. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just break down this movie. Let me know in the comments below anything of action movies that you are to be possibly interested in, or maybe you are to go on and like um, movies that deal with a handicapped or handy capable person of any kind. Maybe anything that kind of just sticks out to you. But regardless, whatever you go on and you say in the comments below, uh, whether you want to talk about what you've watched recently or which have you, like, it goes on and does help out the channel, as well as also maybe gives me ideas of stuff that I may want to check out in the future for the channel. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to go into this film and break it all down. Because I think it's about that time, yet again, to, of course, do the song dance that I always like to do. So, it is spoiler time. It's about that time you spoil this movie. Let me know in the comments below anything that you would like to talk about, regardless of actual subject. And maybe at the end of the day, I will reply, because I often try to do that, unless there are sometimes where there's just some stuff where it's like, ah. Anyways, so with that said, let's go on and let's pause this video here and get up my cast list where I insist to help me go on and break down this entire film, even though it's fairly simple enough. Regardless, I may go on and not exactly remember how this movie all plays out. So without a doubt, those are there to help me. So with that said, let's pause here. Let's whip that out. All right. So in the very beginning of this, we have Nick making his way through the forest of a war zone. Nick is going on and consistently saying that he can't see. He's calling out for Frank, desperately trying to go on and figure out how he can make his way through this war zone, through this brush. And eventually he stumbles upon a trap that leaves him into a net. That the next thing we see is him to have this very leaf-like blindfold over his eyes. I guess as a way to kind of just heal his eyes from being blinded. It seems. So Nick is getting flashbacks from the war and is with these Vietnamese people that are nursing him back to health, giving him food. We have at one point a snake getting right into Nick's face, to where Nick kind of freaks out. But then all of a sudden, Nick is to start to realize that he is to have his senses be heightened, that he is to go on and start hearing sounds kind of coming from all over the place. And Nick is like, all right, well, like, so could we start to hear uh, these, these banging, like things of people kind of working and uh, and metal pieces being burnt and so on and so forth. Uh, so we have one of the swordsmen of this town here that is to go on and cut this melon into a number of pieces, and they then rip the melon open, and it is given to Nick, and Nick is like, "Oh, is this some kind of melon?" So we have this swordsman that hands Nick this sword, assuming that when they throw this melon up in the air, that Nick will hear it and will cut it, like this swordsman had gone on to do. So the swordsman goes on and chucks this melon in the air. Nick has it well past by him, and they all just start laughing because it's like, well, yeah, of course he's not going to go on and be able to cut the melon. So the swordsman takes it upon himself to take Nick and have him learn the ways of a swordsman, to go on and have uh the fighting techniques of using a sword, as Nick has this swordsman right in front of him, and they're holding the sword both together, and he's doing the moves, and so Nick is to be like, okay, all right, like I'm gonna learn everything that this guy is learning from, and then Nick hugs him after like the sword is be sheathed back into the side there. So after so much time is to go on and pass here, we finally do have Nick who cuts the melon in half. And the whole tribe of people, the whole people within this place, they all erupt because they're like, oh my god, he did it. They're like, oh my, they like swarm around him and they pat him on the back, like, yeah, you did it. All right. So Nick seemingly is to learn everything that he can from these people, and he has gone on to just kind of be home for far too long that he needs to make his way back to the States. So we have Miami, Florida, 20 years later. Nick is going on and walking his way from the road to make his way to the Devereaux house. That's the journey that he tries to go into here. So Nick goes on and is to kind of be having this stick of his, which is also a sword, to be trying to see if there's going to be anything in front of him. We have a pop can that he kind of kicks out of the way. We have a bit of poop that Nick jumps over. And then Nick goes on and is to smack into something which he assumes is a doggy. So he says, "Oh, nice doggy," and it's actually an alligator, because Nick doesn't know any better. So because he doesn't quite hear what the thing, yeah. So he just assumes doggy. So Nick jumps over that also. So Nick makes his way into a town. It seems that there's a liquor store and a number of other amenities here. It seems that where this place that Nick goes into is a possible bar, but they serve burritos there. So yeah, we could come to just have this look like a bar, but they serve food also. So Nick orders a burrito and ends up getting given one. We have a gang that is within this bar, and a gang leader approaches said Nick. The gang leader realizes that Nick is blind as he kind of waves his hand in front of him. Nick makes no notion of seeing this guy's hand, so it's like, all right, well, I guess he's blind. So the gang leader goes on to ask Nick about, like, well, hey man, like, it seems that your burrito is missing some salsa. Would you like mild or hot? And so Nick is like, oh, mild, please. So we go on to have the gang leader that sprays the hottest sauce onto the burrito and gives it back to Nick. Nick takes the burrito, eats it, and at first he is to kind of make this face of, and the gang laughs. We then go on to have Nick, who is to kind of not show his cards here, and he says it's not bad. It's a little too mild for me. How about something a little bit more macho? And then the gang members are like, that son of a guy, like he's going on and he's trying to get the better of us. So so after that, all of a sudden this woman comes in and the gang leader rips the purse off of this girl's shoulder and they start playing keep away. They start tossing this purse back and forth to all the guys, and eventually it lands near Nick's footsteps as it falls. Nick goes on and is to grab the purse, and the gang leader wants the purse back. So Nick is like, "Oh, like you want this purse to match your dress?" And it's like, "Ooh, ah!" So the gang leader has this knife, flings it open because it's one of those flip knives. So and Nick is to go on and get ever so close to the gang leader as he knows from sound where he is in the room. And the blade gets ever so close to Nick's chest. So he's like, oh, okay, all right. So here's where we go on and have Nick, who's to start to beat the out of these guys with his staff. Beats the crap out of all of them, and then he apologizes. We then have to go to Reno, Nevada, to show Frank's story here. So Frank is dangling upside down from a Silver States building in Reno that has on top of it, say, McCready on it. So Frank is dangling upside down here as McCready is to go on and state how Frank has kind of gotten deep with Frank owing them money. And so now, like, he's going to go on and have to make drugs for them to kind of make up for the loss. And Frank really wants nothing of it, but he's dangling upside down. They're going on and they're loosening their grip on Frank, having him almost slide down further and further, to where Frank, it seems, is to be forced to agree to McCready's terms. So we then go on to transition here. Nick makes his way to the Devereaux home. The reason why Nick is to go on and know that is because he pats this sign that oddly says Devereaux on it. And, like, I don't know if you can I don't know if you could really have him pat the sign and be able to touch that and read that it says Devereaux on it, but that's what he tries to do here. So Nick makes his way to this home at a convenient time where Billy, who is sculpting this dinosaur, is trying to carve his own name into it. And he accidentally cuts himself and has the dinosaur go flying out the window. If you guys are to go on and say possibly that this kid could probably look familiar, maybe you had gone on and seen the show Step by Step, because I had gone on and seen that show Step by Step. I'm like, oh yeah, this kid looks familiar. But why? But I'm like, oh yeah, he was in Step by Step. All right, he looks very familiar. So Billy goes on and is to have the dinosaur going flying out the window after he cut himself and kind of let the dinosaur go. As the dinosaur is falling, we have Nick who catches it and is to touch the dinosaur and read uh, Billy's name carved into it. So Nick makes his way to the door as Lynn, who is Billy's mother, is to be looking at all the bills and then makes her way to the door. So Lynn goes on to answer the door, and Nick is to state that I am looking for Frank. I'm an old friend of his, and asks if this is the correct address. Lynn states that Frank hasn't lived here in a very long time or doesn't live here anymore. And so, as Nick takes off his sunglasses, I feel that Lynn immediately knows that Nick is blind. So, because he, of course, is not looking directly at her. So, Lynn is to go on to be a nice woman. So it's like, hey, Nick, come on in. Like, you're not going to be any harm to us. Just sit down and just kind of take a load off. I'm sure you made a very long way to get here. So Lynn goes on to explain to Nick who her son is. And Nick is to already know who Billy's name is. And Nick has to go on and explain that he had caught the dinosaur from out the window. And he read that it had the lettering of Billy within it. That's why he knows who this kid is already. So Lynn has to explain to her son that obviously this guy is vision impaired. And so Lynn is to go on and ask if Nick would like any coffee. And he's like, oh, tea, please. And so Billy gets up close to Nick and is to go on and is to start mocking Nick, realizing that he's blind. And so we have Billy that starts to say, goodbye, Mr. Parker. See you later, Mr. Parker. Nice to meet you. And while Billy is saying all this, he's giving Nick the finger. And Nick grabs Billy's hand because he probably could feel the motion that is to be in front of his face. So Nick grabs Billy's hand and like, hey, nice to meet you too. So Lynn and Nick start to talk to one another, and they assumed at one point that Nick was dead. They had a memorial for him and everything. And Nick is say, yes, I've been there. Yes, I've been missing in action. And evidently Nick has realized that Frank never told Lynn about what had happened there at the Vietnam War. And so Nick is to go on and ask where Frank is now, and Lynn ends up stating Reno, and that he is an organic chemist, and so explains where he used to work and everything like that. So, and then also that the two of them had broke up, that they're divorced now. So Nick all of a sudden is hear somebody making his or their way to the door before it actually has any knocking or anything. And Lynn is like, all right, like, I guess there's going to be somebody at the door then. So she makes her way to the doorway. And coincidentally enough, yeah, someone's there. Two crooked cops and a guy named Slag. So they're making their way to find where Billy is, as they supposedly want to question Billy about some crime scene that he had been involved in. And so the further and further they go on about this, and they're trying to find Billy here. We go on to have, of course, Nick, who can probably sense what's kind of going on here, bizarrely, and just the tone of the way that these people are talking. So Nick gets up and he accidentally falls a little bit and spills his coffee, just to kind of sense like what these people are to go on and do, and then he apologizes. So Nick also goes on to ask the cops if any one of these police officers have a warrant of any kind. And so once this transpires and once this happens, we then have Slag that grabs the woman, holds on to her, and we have Billy that runs to try and help out his mother, as then Slag is to whip Lynn, have his shotgun out, and shoot Lynn and have her fall to the ground here as Nick catches her. And so now Nick is to go on and seemingly be face to face with these three men. Nick, slowly but surely, is to have his staff out, and we have the cops telling Nick to step aside, blind man. So Nick hears that one of the officers in front of him is to have his gun out in front of him, and he's starting to almost pull the trigger here. So Nick goes on to chop off the hand of this police officer, and as Nick goes on to use his sword to fight him on Slag and the other officer, and the cops start to whip their guns out, Nick thrusts himself in the other room, and one of the other corrupt officers tries to follow him within there. Having then Nick go on to take this officer within the other room, slice him up, as well as the number of other items that are within this room, like a statue and a bookcase, and the cop ends up getting sliced up pretty good that he falls over. We then have Nick that faces off against Slag. Slag has this like billy club, and so the two of them face off together. Slag is to, of course, be so strong that he takes this this shelf that has all these like um, fragile items and tips it over to separate the two of them. So as Nick goes on to try to figure out where exactly Slag is, there is to be a cop that comes behind Nick. And so Nick stabs this police officer from then behind and then goes back after Slag, realizing that the two of them, like, they're the only ones left now that Nick has to deal with here. So as Nick and Slag are kind of running almost triangle to one another, or kind of an angle to get to one another, Nick goes on and is to hope that his slice is to get to Slag, but instead it just cuffs off uh, Slag's cigar, having Slag state, like, man, you're a pretty good swordsman. And then Slag states, is like, but that butter knife ain't got nothing and no bullets, or ain't gonna stop no bullets. gibberish that we have to go into here. So Slag thrusts his way through a window, and I don't get why, but like I guess that is in his mind to think that that is to be the only thing that is going to save him away from this swordsman from getting stabbed and killed here. So Slag busts his way through this window, and also like it's an action film. We always have to have people bust through windows. And if you also go on, you look at like Friday the 13th, people bust through windows all the goddamn time. It kind of gets a joke within that series to see like Jason busting through a window or some victim being thrusted through a window. It happens all the time. So Nick makes his way back to Lynn as she's dying here. Lynn wants a promise from Nick that she'll take care of her son and just kind of just promise to just kind of protect him and everything like that. And so Nick goes on and agrees to the promise, agrees to take him Billy to his father Frank. And so Nick goes on and agrees to all this as then Lynn dies and Nick puts his hand over Lynn's eyes and she passes away. Nick now is to go on and walk with Billy in his arms, and eventually that doesn't last for very long, because of course it doesn't. So we have Billy that asks Nick where his mother is, and Nick has to explain that his mother is just home, not dead. So Billy, of course, wants to see his mother, but it's like, I'm sorry, you're not gonna be able to do that. We gotta go. So they make their way to this train station. Train station. Is it a train station? Maybe it's a bus station. Yeah, I think it's a bus station. Yeah, that's more correct. They make their way to this bus station, and Billy and both Nick are having such a disagreement that some security guard ends up walking by, like, "Hey, is everything okay here?" And Nick is to explain, "Yeah, everything is fine." So both Nick and Billy make their way onto this transcontinental bus as Slag is to be looking off in the distance, like, alright, okay, I'll follow them. So both Billy and Nick are on this bus, and they are passing Alabama, and we have Billy that keeps flinging his either his arm or his leg to just kind of keep Nick awake as he's trying to sleep on the bus. So we're now back to MacReady's place, where Frank is to go on and find out through the room that he has to be left with, that there is a news article that says, "Woman, two policemen slain, boy missing," and it connects to Frank here. So a guy named Ed, tuxedoed and well dressed here, brings in a woman named Annie, I believe. Annie, it seems to be Frank's girlfriend. The two of them had met together while Frank had been in the casino, and they oddly just hit it off here. We kind of, like, in some aspects of this, we don't exactly know what side Annie's on, because at some point she kind of works alongside these thugs, and then is to go on and help out Nick and Billy here. So I think we have to just realize that Annie is to be a good moral person that is just kind of with the wrong people or forced to be with the wrong people. So like there's some wiggle room there. So Annie meets up with Frank and brings him some stuff. And I think one of them is like a cigar box, as he's like, oh man, the whole box. So uh, Frank ends up asking Annie, hey, like, does your boss know that you're bringing me stuff here? And she's like, well, I do the inventory, so he'll never know. So Frank goes on and asks how she got in here, and they let her in. And so Frank is to ask her, it's like, well, hey, like, do you know why I'm here? And Annie's like, no, and I don't want to know. But listen to me, Frank. When people owe MacReady, they pay one way or the other. So just don't go along. So Frank is to go on having his hand in his face. He's just distraught, and so Frank is to go on and definitively give in to MacReady and just be like, okay, whatever he wants, I'll just do it. So to make things easier. So Annie makes her way out, and Ed is to meet her, and so Annie leaves. I'm like, yeah, what is Annie gonna like? What kind of doesn't make any sense here is like Frank just asks Annie. It's like, well, hey, like, how did you get in here? Like, did you have to bribe anybody? No, like they just let her in because if anything, they can also use Annie as a bargaining chip to force Frank to do what he's doing. But then also, why didn't they just hold Annie hostage for how much value she has, and they wouldn't have to go after Billy in the first goddamn place? But that's just me here, just thinking out loud. But anyways, let's go back here to the movie. So the bus ride has come to a stop at a certain point, and it's really raining like cats and dogs outside. So both Billy and both Nick stop for a bit of food here, and so Billy's kind of complaining about how it's still raining, and Nick tells Billy it's like, well, water never hurt anyone, and so as both Nick and Billy make their way back to the bus, Nick falls, and it's like, oh well, yeah, like little rain never hurt anybody, huh? So Billy starts going on, and he starts walking back to the bus, and he trips and he falls also, and he's like, oh, I hurt my knee, and Nick tells Billy, it's like, oh, like, well, let's wait for the paramedics to come. So Billy finds a rock on the ground and tells Nick that he'd found some piece of candy and he's willing to give Nick a piece of it. So Nick takes the piece of candy, he starts to consume it because the candy is actually a rock. So Nick then goes on and is to like, well, uh, like, well, it's not my kind of candy or something. I think he says something and then he spits it back out and it hits Nick on the head. So the two of them get back on the bus. Nick goes on and starts going through, or Billy goes on to look through Nick's stuff. He ends up finding this photo of both Frank and him. So Nick then goes on to explain to Billy about the war. So it seems that the guys were all kind of gathered around this army team, and they were all just having a celebration. They were all having a party, just because they were at a time where there was a possibility that they were just going to go home. And Frank was going on and making firecrackers, and because he would always go on and kind of do that with his friends here. And once these people were going on and celebrating, all of a sudden there ends up going on and being an attack. And they realize that they're in war, they're in battle, so they go on and they try to face off against the Vietnamese people. And it seems that Frank was was to be at a certain position, and then Nick was going to go forward, and Frank ends up kind of going on his own, just kind of half cocked and just kind of running off. Nick is to go on and be like, "Hey, Frank, what are you doing?" And so here's in lies all these explosions starting to happen, and then here is where Nick becomes blind. So I kind of way over explain it, or kind of very generically explain it. I'm not quite sure exactly if I got everything of detail right, but I just kind of quickly went through it all. So Frank left them, went on his own, and yeah, so that's why Nick had gotten blind, because Frank is just Nick's best friend, so we try to run after him to protect him. So Nick ends up saying to Billy that was the last thing that he'd ever seen, and so Billy goes on to ask if Frank uh, did okay in the war, and Nick just goes on and just tells Billy, it's like, oh yeah, he did just fine. He's fine. Like, at least he's alive, right? So, because I guess, yeah, like, this family was so separated that maybe within the, yeah, like, Frank never explained anything about the war, so, to his family, yeah, so, anyways, so this bus stops at this general goods store, and the bus driver explaining that they only have 10 minutes and then he's going to leave without them. So Billy rushes to this phone booth to try to make a phone call to try to connect to his home. So he gets this operator and he is to try to dial collect, and he's waiting for this phone call to go through, and Nick finds Billy, he rips the phone from him, and then he's like, okay, Billy, I'm gonna have to tell you the truth. I'm gonna have to explain what happened to your mother. So Nick pulls him aside near this tractor and is to tell him the truth. Billy runs away. He runs in this cornfield. Nick follows after him because he realizes that, like, hey, like, I promised his mother that I was gonna go and protect him, so I'm gonna follow him into this cornfield. As Billy and Nick make their way through this cornfield, this is where Slag and his mercenaries all act here. Slag grabs Nick and eventually goes on to throw him into a shed, and the rest of these mercenaries are in this cornfield going after Nick. So there's the one, I think some of these characters actually do have names here, but I will not take the time to have memorized them all. Plus, also they were so late in the game here, so for me to really just care about every single one of their names, so because there's like at some point where I just wanted to keep the cast list and memorization very low, so for obvious reasons. So Nick here starts to go through the cornfield and he starts hearing people. So there are people with popcorn bags just gonna, and Nick can start hearing that, and there are people with shotguns and so on and so forth, pistols and all kinds of things. So Nick starts hearing all of these people, and so he's like, all right, like something makes Nick feel that they're not alone here. So there is at one point where these guys are going and they're cocking their guns, realizing that Nick is nearby. And so Nick goes on and cuts his cornfield and kills a number of people. Nick goes on to see the guy with the popcorn bag and another guy with this red bandana. And Nick just says the word shoot, and he clings this sword and this wood piece together. So the two of these guys turn, and Popcorn shoots the guy in the bandana and kills him by accident. And then Popcorn, the guy with the popcorn bag, is just kind of walking along this cornfield trying to find where this guy is. So Nick will bump into this guy, Popcorn, and he ends up getting killed shortly thereafter. So the woman with the two guns here is going on and asking the other guys alongside her what the hell is going on around here. Yeah, I guess you don't know that an assassin named Nick is to go on and take you guys out so freaking easily. Guess you were unexpected about that. So Slag has decided to make his way on top of the shed of which that he threw Billy in. And so now we have this weird whack-a-mole game going on here where we have Nick who has a scarecrow and he's consistently popping the head of the scarecrow up, where Slag takes the shotgun and he fires into the cornfield. Slag continues to fire this scarecrow, and that has Nick figure out exactly where Slag is. Nick cuts down the shed. The shed ends up uh, folding and having Slag roll off of it, to where then Nick goes on and slices into Slag, but not enough to kill him here, I don't believe. Yeah, like he gets back up because he has this bulletproof vest. So Nick goes on to find within the shed Billy is there. Nick grabs Billy, they get the heck out of there, and Nick tries to comfort Billy to say everything's gonna be alright as they get the F out of there. So Nick and Billy are now just hoofing it on the road. At some point, Nick is to realize that rain is going to happen, and so he grabs his umbrella as it starts to rain. Here is where then Slag gets up and has his bulletproof vest on his chest and realizes, haha, like I got better of this guy. And so now we go back to Reno. Mergrini is talking to Ed, and here is where they are to go on and realize that that it seems that this whole blind man is really being more difficult than they, of course, would realize. MacReady is to think that these guys should be drunk or to be stupid or something for how they're saying that they're getting bested by a blind man makes no sense. MacReady then goes on to ask a guy named Ed, like, well, hey, how about we just get Bruce Lee? And Ed is like, well, Bruce Lee is obviously dead. And it's like, well, get his brother then. Get someone who is as skilled as him to go up against this guy and just do it. So both Nick and Billy, they're sharing fireside together, or a fire together. Nick has concocted some way of, well, he has a lighter, so quite easily they had an ability to make it a fire here. And so Billy is to have allergies. He is to say that he is to have the sniffles and whatever. And they also, I think, brought that up in the early part of the film, or they brought it up somewhere. So But Billy mentions that his nose is always stuffed up. And so Nick is to touch all over Billy's face to then say it's like, well, hey, like you have a strong chin. Uh, that means you're a strong man, and oh, you have tears. You're crying right now. Like good, like because of a strong man is never too afraid to cry. Billy turns to Nick and asks, well, hey, like, do you ever cry? And Nick explains that no, like, I don't have tear ducts anymore to have the ability to cry. But then we'll find out that is all a lie. That Nick is just trying to be strong for Billy, and by the end of the film, we'll see that Nick can cry by the end of this movie, and we'll see it, and it'll be nice. So Nick explains to Billy that they'll be at his father's tomorrow, and Billy is to tell Nick, it's like, well, my father doesn't even want me, and Nick is like, oh, come on, like, with talent like yours, like, any man would love a son like this, as he shows him the dinosaur from before. So, the following morning, we have Nick that is probably slept up against a tree, as Billy is in somewhat of a kind of a sleeping bag, more of like blankets than anything else. So there all of a sudden is this bug flying around Billy as Nick is to go on and take the bug and within the air cut it in half to where this old couple is to look at it like, hey man, would you look at that? It's like, yeah, we need definitely one of those. So Nick is to kind of laugh and to just kind of sit back into his tree. And so the next thing we see here is both Nick and Billy making their way to Frank Devereaux's apartment. So Billy is to explain to Nick that there's a possibility that his father won't want him and he may not want his father. And Nick is to say to Billy, it's like, well, hey, all that, like, that was in the past. Like, let's try to learn how to forgive and let's just kind of come on here. So Billy takes, or Nick takes Billy to the door and finds Anna there. Still not Frank. So the two of them go inside and they're to have a gun be put uh, to their skulls. And we have both of these cowboys here. One named Lyle and one named Tector, I believe is the other guy's name. It's a weird, bizarre name. That when they kept saying it in the movie, I'm like, this makes no goddamn sense. Why would they have this guy's name named Tector? Stupid. But if anything, I guess it's stupid for the film. So they go on, and Lyle knocks Nick out here, and they go on to tie the both of them up. So Lyle and Tector put both Nick and Billy into the back of their van and they drive off. So we have Billy and Nick in the back and they're trying to get out of their ties. So Nick turns to Billy now and is to hope that Billy can free himself via his ties to then have Billy grabbing Nick's lighter so Nick can go on and be free also. So we have at a point where Lyle is to take this sword as at first he sees it as sick, but then he keeps adjusting it and he's like, oh, there's a blade here. So Lyle goes on and is to touch the blade and realize how sharp it is, and he cuts his finger. He's like, ah, I cut my. What do you think was gonna happen, Lyle? Come on there, buddy. So Lyle goes on and says that this sword is cursed and that he wants to chuck it out of the van. And Nick overhears this and tells Billy to start counting. So Tector is to go on and call Nick a blind Zorro. And so what happens here is that there's all of a sudden a fire going on in the van. We see in the back where Nick is to have Billy light these bits of pieces of cloth on fire, and Nick chucks it in for the van. The van all of a sudden starts smoking. Tector realizes it first and then relays it to Lyle. They stop the van. They open the back of the van up, and Billy is there with a fire extinguisher blasting Lyle, having him fall over. As Tector goes on and opens up the van to try to see what's going on himself, Nick grabs Tector, and the both of them are to go on and be on the ground here. As Lyle grabs a gun and gets up here, there's a fire extinguisher that goes across his face. So they realize fairly quickly here that they all have to get back into the van to get away from these guys. So what happens here as they make their way into the van, Nick tells Annie to turn around to go the other way because he wants to go back for his sword. So Annie goes on, makes their way back to the sword, and they're kind of looking for it for a bit of while there, but they do find it, and they all get back into the van. Come to find out, Lyle and Tector have commandeered a vehicle from two old ladies, sadly enough. And so, kind of throwing them out of the car, and one of the old ladies grabs this gun and starts firing into her own car. And it's like, god dang. Uh, and then Tector goes on to explain, it's like, well, that's why I always wanted to vote for gun control. Like, these guys have guns themselves. So, as Nick, Annie, and Billy find the sword running their way back to the van, Annie loses her glasses and Nick finds them by crushing them. So Annie, I guess now she is too blind to be able to drive this car herself. You would think out of probably the three of them, Annie would probably have a better shot at driving this car, but instead, we then have Nick that takes his way behind the wheel and starts to drive, telling Billy to just guide for him. So, but of course, this was going to happen that a blind person was going to drive. It had to happen in the movie. It makes more sense to just have this just uh, be this thing that is to just kind of be more interesting to the film. So now there's a chase going on between Lyle and Tector's car and Nick's. So we're having Nick being guided by Billy of where to turn, and there's at one point where there's Nick bumping into a car like, "Hey, are you blind?" And the guy's like, "Well, yes, I am." It's like, "Yeah, what's your excuse?" And he's like, "Oh." So Nick further drives, and he even gets to the point where he drives through a red light, and he's also driving into traffic. That's how crazy things are getting. So at one point, Nick drives into what is to almost be a dead end. And there is also the point where Billy gives the Lyle and Tector guys the finger. It's kind of funny. So Lyle and Tector go on to be following Nick's car before it gets to the dead end, and they flip their car and that's why like Nick, Billy, and Annie they make their way to this dead end without having the problem of these boys following them. So once Nick is to go on and stop here, he states maybe I should go on and try to get my license back again. So we cut to Annie making her way to her friend who is Colleen, who lives in a trailer. Nothing wrong with that. Colleen seems to be some fitness nut, and she is very, very flexible. She's going on and watching some yoga video. So it seems that Colleen is letting Billy stay there, and so Annie needs to be very appreciative. So Annie goes on to explain to Nick how Frank and Annie both met, how she was working at a casino, and like the two of them just kind of hit it off. So that she was, I think, working tables and like so yeah. So we go on to have Nick um need to realize that it's like, all right, like, well, I'm going to take this taxi and I'm going to try to find Frank. And Annie is to tell Frank, it's like, well, hey, like, do whatever you need to do to get Frank out of there. And Nick is like, well, hey, don't worry about that as he drives away after Billy is to call Nick Uncle Frank and or Uncle Nick, I mean. And Nick is like, oh, like I'm your you're my nephew now. Oh, that's good. So and I think this is where also Billy makes a promise, or Nick makes a promise to Billy about getting his dad back to him, and so yeah, so and then he leaves. So Nick makes his way to the casino, and it seems that he's really good at the roulette wheel. Nick starts to figure out the layout of the casino, and goes on to overhear McCready and Eddie talking here. And the two of them are saying, I don't think he'll play along much longer unless we show him real proof. So that means uh, that they're going to try to go on and get some kind of hostage for Frank to go on and commit to do the whole making the drugs thing. So they also are going on and talking about how after Frank is to go on and make the drugs, that they're gonna kill him afterwards. So and they're talking about how like they're gonna find the kid at one point that'll turn up, and Slag hasn't kind of disappointed them in the past, but yeah, so but they need at some point some kind of proof that they have this kid so they can use it against Frank. So but realistically what they but by the end of this conversation like they're looking for a chemist that'll kind of work with them and have a better attitude. That's why they say they're gonna kill Frank after this deal is over. Uh, so Frank goes on to find these men making their way to this elevator as they do this combination, which Nick overhears. They make their way to this elevator as Nick realizes that there are two guards near the elevator. So Nick makes his way to the roulette wheel. Nick seems to be doing really good on the roulette wheel, and he keeps winning. He's winning so much that there are huge chips in front of him. So we get to a point where, since Nick is doing absurdly well here, that they end up going on to rig the game so he loses because he's putting all of his chips on this bet. And so what ends up happening here is Nick can kind of hear things so well that he realizes that this thing is getting rigged. So Nick goes on to take his sword to cut into the dealer's vest and sees that there is a 26 on this device that he has in his pocket, and they rip off the roulette wheel, and it has 26 and a blinking light into it. We have a woman that grabs the roulette wheel and is say, like, look at this, like, they're cheating over here. So now we all of a sudden start to have this casino. Everybody's going into this fight, and Nick is grabbing all these chips that he possibly can, as well as other people are. So Nick runs to the elevator, repeats the combination which he had heard before, and then goes into the elevator as it seems that there's someone going on, of a waiter of sorts that is bringing someone food. Nick goes on to find that one of the big bodyguards are trying to make their way into the elevator as he stops one of them and takes them out. Both of the bodyguards fall over, and then they're going to follow Nick. Both Lyle and Tector are there, and so they follow suit with these two white tuxed men. And so we would go on to have Nick, who is now wearing the disguise of this waiter, and he's obviously wearing not exactly the same matching garb as the normal waiter. So these two bodyguards find it to be very suspicious, so they turn guns on Nick, and they thrust his tray that he's carrying off with to find the other waiter, and so they put a gun to him. And so we have Nick that goes on to explain that he's here for Frank Devereaux, and as the two men have guns at him, Nick takes his stick and thrusts it into both of their faces, having them fall over. I don't quite understand why either one of these people didn't blast their guns and kill this guy then. I guess we just have to chalk it off to, like, hey, Blind Man has to continue to just beat the hell out of all these people and survive, so that's what we have to chalk it up to be. So the four men in the elevator are trying to make their way to where Nick is, and Nick ends up breaking the elevator to where the elevator seems to no longer be functional, to where they have to force the elevator to open so that way they can get to Nick, and they'll do that fairly soon here. So Nick makes his way to Ed, and the two of them have a bit of a chat here. And when they go on and they have a bit of a chat, Nick takes a swipe to then cut off both of Ed's eyebrows. And Nick is to state that he also does circumcisions. So Ed goes on and gives in to Nick's demands, as Nick is going to explain that he's looking for Frank, and Ed throws Nick the keys and tells Nick that Frank is across the hall. So Nick goes on and knocks out Eddie and makes his way to where Frank is. So Frank is going on and doing this experiment, not knowing exactly who is to go on and be behind him here, thinking that these guys are wanting him to finish up on his experiment, and then Nick shows his face in front of Frank to be like, oh, Nick. And then the two of them are to be like, oh yeah, Frank, Nick, Frank, like, hey buddy. So Frank realizes that Nick is alive, and Nick is like, well, yeah, I'd like to keep it that way. It seems that there's a bunch of ticked off men that are after me, and seemingly have some tie to you. So, uh, so Nick explains to Frank that his son is waiting, and for them to try to get out of here. But Frank is like, wait a minute. So Nick goes on and gets the drugs that these guys need, so that way he has some kind of bargaining chip for whatever happens here. And then he lights the place on fire and runs out. So Lyle, Tector, and the two white tuxedoed men make their way out of this elevator as Frank goes on to light up the room. So as Frank and Nick make their way to try and escape here through this building, they make their way to this taxi, and they come to find Colleen's trailer. They find that Colleen is dead and that Billy has been taken. So Frank ends up getting a phone call from MacReady here. Also, Nick is to find Stag's cigar and know that Stag was here. So Frank ends up getting a phone call, and I'm kind of I was like, how is it that Frank knows, or how is it that MacReady knows exactly when to call Frank? But maybe there's some people watching him anyways. So the two of them talk. It's like, well, hey, I have your son. Meet me at this ski resort, and like come with the stuff. And yeah, so kind of very simple, basic here. So both Frank and Nick are going on to make their way uh, to this resort via this cable car elevator thing that you would go on and see in quite often a number of ski resorts, or just quite often like I've seen them in just kind of some other kind of places. I've seen them in action shows at some point where like people just have cable cars. Like, oh, this is kind of weird to see this to be used. I always see them in ski resorts. So, or I've seen them in like Until Dawn. Anyways, so also we have MacReady, who is talking with the drug dealers and stating it's like, well, hey man, like if we kind of get things going, maybe we'll have a regular pipeline between the two of us. And the drug dealer was like, well, yeah, maybe. It's just kind of like, I don't know about this. So both Frank and both Nick are starting to make Molotov cocktails, and at some point within this ride between the two of them, uh, Frank ends up stating to Nick that he thought that he was dead. That Frank thought that Nick was dead, and that Frank kind of blamed himself. And he tried to probably forgive himself, but he just couldn't. And so eventually we come to the point between the two of them here where Nick is to go on and say, it's like, well, you know what? Like, I think I wanted to confront you to have, like, kind of us kind of forgive one another for what had happened, and just kind of to move on, to kind of have them both get kind of the closure that they needed. And that after that, like Nick just wanted to just also just he just wanted to go home. So once this ski lift makes their way to this high camp place, we all of a sudden have Slag and his men blowing into this thing like nobody's business, with all these guns firing, and eventually we have Slag and his men look into the cable car to realize that it's completely empty because both Nick and both Frank had escaped underneath the cable car, I guess because they were probably expecting some kind of trap or something. And we have to kind of realize that these people, like, they have to continue on living because they're the heroes of the story. So both Nick and Frank make their way through this hall room that is filled with these lockers, and Lyle and Tector are there with guns. So Frank goes on to run off away from Nick, and Nick goes on to grab Lyle and puts a sword to his lips and uses him uh, as a kind of a shield against Tector, who also has a gun here. So Tector shoots Lyle here. He falls over, and Lyle, because of Tector's stupidity, Lyle shoots Tector and kills him. So more firing is happening between Ed and a number of other mercenaries or men here. And Nick is kind of stuck in between these lockers, and he's getting flashbacks of the war. So Nick runs to the opposite side of where he is to then make his way through this place, tripping on all of these items like a ladder and so on and so forth, forcing his way into almost uh, this room where there are these band instruments, and eventually Ed and their men are going to circle around Nick here and possibly try and kill him here. Nick further crawls to eventually smack into a microphone where he hears over the the speaker his own self breathing. So the further and further Nick gets through all these instruments, these guys surround him. We assume that Nick is done here, and then all of a sudden there's this breaker that gets ripped out, and all the lights go out, and they're like, "Hey, where is he?" So things are to be much more evened out as Nick starts to go from behind people and start to one by one start to kill them. We come to find out that Frank is not to have run away from Nick this time. If anything, he's kind of helping him out here. He's throwing these explosives, these stick pieces of dynamite, and like, here you go, you sons of bitches, and he tosses it. So the dynamite. So Nick goes on and slices through all these people, takes them all out. So at this point, this drug dealer is to just kind of be kind of like, hey man, I've been waiting long enough for this. So like the dealer is to almost kind of walk away from MacReady here, and MacReady is to tell this drug dealer, it's like, well, hey, we cut a deal, and the dealer is like, well, hey, if you ever get that stuff away from the blind man, like, find yourself another buyer. So MacReady tells Slag, hey man, like, do it. So we all of a sudden have an explosion going on, a door is open. MacReady goes on to make his way to Billy with a shotgun to Billy, and Nick and Frank make it further to MacReady, and Frank goes on and drops the stuff in front of MacReady here, the drugs that he wants. So we then go on to have the assassin come into the way here to face off against Nick, and the two of them face off. After the assassin is going and bite into this apple, chuck it in the air, and Nick slices it in half. When the two of them fight it out, we have Nick that is to touch the face of the assassin and realize that he's Japanese. So the two of them make their way fighting through this entire place. There's a bench press that ends up getting destroyed here, sadly enough. They end up getting close to a jacuzzi here that ends up getting electrified. And the two of them are fighting on top of this jacuzzi. And it gets to an aspect where the assassin is to be grabbing, like, there's this kind of balance beam thing that is to be on the ceiling of this. And so this assassin is grabbing onto that and kind of swinging back and forth and trying to face Nick, but eventually this balance beam thing, this thing that's just kind of holding this assassin on into the wall here, breaks, and the assassin kind of falls through into the jacuzzi and gets electrified and gets killed. Slag gets back into the mix here and tells Nick, it's like, well, hey, not bad for a blind man, as Slag shoots Nick, and Nick goes on to eventually kind of just fall off to the side here. And Slag tells Nick, it's like, well, yeah, I told you that butter knife won't stop no bullet. Nick goes on and chucks the knife, stabbing Slag in the chest here, and so Slag falls over. We then would go on to have Billy, who finds Nick's knife here, as both Frank and MacReady are fighting over the shotgun. And Billy throws Nick the knife here, and Nick obviously doesn't catch it. So instead, Nick is to start to look for this knife as Slag gets back up and is trying to go for his gun. Nick and Slag both fight here. Nick gets killed, and so I think we also had the MacReady Frank battle with the shotgun, and I think Frank ends up killing MacReady here with the shotgun, I believe. Because the next thing we see here is that, like, that the day is kind of saved here. The next thing we see is a bus that is going to San Francisco. Frank turns to Billy, his son, and is asked, like, well, hey, what do you want to see in San Francisco? And Billy's like, Alcatraz. And I'm like, Alcatraz? Okay, we're going to go. So Nick also has a bus ticket to go with them, but he tosses the bus ticket to the ground and he starts walking away. Billy follows after him, and the further and further that Billy falls after Nick here, as Nick is across the road, there's this bus that is to be driven to, of course, where Nick was, and then all of a sudden Nick disappears. Billy is now on this bridge, and he is crying about Uncle Nick, and he says that he will miss him, and so on and so forth. And Billy goes on and takes this dinosaur and he chucks it, and we again have conveniently Nick, who is underneath this bridge. He catches the dinosaur, he cries, and then walks off, and we never see him again. So Billy reunites with his father. They go back onto the bus and they leave, and that's how the movie just kind of ends in our story. So, with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Let me know in the comments below anything that you'd like to talk about this movie, because I've already said that a billion times already. So, I liked this movie. It was good. It was entertaining. I really did like it. So, hopefully, at the end of the day, you liked it too. But anything, I'll get out of here so I can put this as an upload for today, so I can get another thing done. So thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.